Okay. I'm hoping, let me know in the chat. I think everyone can see our presentation, but I want to make sure everyone
Yes,
can.
you're all good.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hi everyone. So we have 2 hours. Get comfortable. And I hope in this presentation, we were here last year and we loved it. Thank you so much for having us. And really in that we went through all the kind of nitty-gritty a bit of SIBO and IBS and gut health and where it begins and where. So I highly recommend you go back, but and definitely we want to answer more of your questions later on tonight. Here we are hopefully going to answer the top 10 myths, confusion questions. We're going to get right to the nitty gritty, kind of I would say what thousands of our patients ask us,
And people in our
and people
community.
in our community ask us. So we put that in a presentation to get right to the point. So hopefully it scratches that itch. It really gets to like what's on the forefront of your mind and the things we're hearing online. So that is really answering the most confusing gut health questions and myths related to plants and fiber. And if we didn't get to your question, that's where please put it in the chat and let us know. We're going to do that wonderful Q&A later on this evening. So we're really excited about that. Again, I'm James Marin, and I'm an integrated registered dietitian, environmental nutritionist, and the co-founder of Married to Health.
I'm Dahlia Marin. I'm an integrative registered dietitian. I'm a certified gastrointestinal nutritionist who has had integrative and functional training, all with nutrition science.
Okay, and so what we're gonna do again, we'll introduce ourselves, kind of who the heck are we? What do we know about all of this and the big topic of gut health? So we'll get into that, get into the top confusing questions. We're gonna talk about our strategy a bit with this, and have that discussion later, and hopefully connect with you all. So part of this connection, guys, if you do go to our website at marriedhealth.com and contact us and let us know you came from Real Truth About Health, you're entered into a really cool giveaway. So we do really cool curative prize packages. We do of like our favorite supplements and brands. We do practice credit and just so much cool stuff. So you're entered to that giveaway. So if you go to marriedhealth.com,
And
make
in this
sure you do
subject,
that.
just write real truth. So that way we know that you came from here, but you'll receive our newsletter as well. We like to update you all on the latest and greatest in gut health, the science on SIBO and IBS, and just what
So much.
we also offer and what we have going on. But also, we have tons of free resources, blogs, recipes, education on our website. So you can always head to Married to Health to check it out. But yes, we'd love for you to connect with us in a deeper way.
Okay, and so getting into it and understanding really where we started, just briefly, is we were our first patient. So for those that don't know, and I'll let Dahlia maybe get into a little bit, but Dahlia had IBS and probably undiagnosed SIBO, which we'll get
Mm-hmm.
into like what that is exactly. But we were our first patients. I suffered from chronic allergies. I was always sick every month. I had joint pain and asthma. I was morbidly obese at a young age. So we know this pain, we know the depression and anxiety and the frustration. And so from that came our love of research, our really curiosity and understanding why our body does what it does and the relation to food. And for a long time, we're like, this is great, but something's missing. And about man, I guess 8 years ago, or maybe 7 to 8 years ago, when microbiome research was more robust and we really found that missing link of the microbiome, really connecting all of this and really just helping so much of the kind of research and education and dietitians and doctors come together and go, the microbiome is amazing. And that being the glue kind of holding it all together really was a light bulb for us and so many of our patients. But in our journey, it was understanding that food is important, but there is so much more to that as well. There's so much more when it comes to your mental health and spiritual health, physical health, and food plays an integral part in all of that. But so I know Dolly had much more than me as well going on,
And,
but
we see comments here that someone wants us to get started. This is really important context because we are not just healthcare practitioners. We have been patients. So it is so important to understand that who you're working with can either have that empathy level, sometimes does not have that empathy level. So we have lived it. We have been through our own health issues as well. So like James said, I grew up, I was a first generation American. I was a latchkey kid growing up, and TV and food were my babysitters. So I quickly found myself going from an overweight child to an obese teen, and I was always sick. I took my fair share and several other people's fair share of antibiotics as well. And clearly that affected my health. Um, and so when that is happening and you're taking antibiotics regularly, you're sick regularly, that will accumulate in other symptoms. So I constantly had a stomach ache. I had constipation, severe constipation. I had brain fog and fatigue. I couldn't keep up with my classmates and my peers. And that then spiraled into other things. As a young adult, I was diagnosed simultaneously with prediabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So my lifestyle choices were affecting my endocrine system. I was having my GI system affected because of, like I said, I was constantly bloated, gassy, constipated, had my own GI issues. It was affecting other systems. I constantly was suffering with UTIs and just had a poor quality of my cells should have been their most resilient, their most vibrant, their most energetic. I was not experiencing that. And so, I decided to study psychology and thought that that would be very interesting. But I really then took a nutrition course for my own education and really realized that the psychology of eating was where it was at because great. I think, there's such an important piece for psychology and there are such incredible professionals for that. But really, I recognized there was more to my psychology of eating. There was more to the psychology of eating with a lot of others I was living with and encountering on a daily basis. And that then had a wider impact on my overall health as well. So I have been there, like James said, at the time, SIBO really wasn't something anyone was ever talking about over 20 years ago. So it's not something that I was diagnosed with, but certainly had all met all the criteria for IBS, got diagnosed with IBS, and just lived it for years and years, and really thought that it was commonplace. Studies show that your microbiome will resemble the microbiome of those that you cohabitate with. So I lived with other people who had IBS. My family members had IBS. So to me, it was normal to be constipated, to be gassy, to have GI pain. And so it wasn't until I met James in college that we were studying nutrition and food science and dietetics that I was like, I don't, is something off? Because he was like, do you realize that every time you eat, you say you have a stomach ache? And I truly did not realize that I would say that until I started taking more note and started really paying attention to which foods are triggering that for me. What is going on? Is this influencing my autoimmune thyroid condition that I was also diagnosed with because I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's? So as I learned more about nutrition, I learned more about myself as well.
And really quickly, let us know in the comments. This is where you can interact in the comments still and just say if that's you. Do you have a stomach ache after you eat? Do you feel extremely bloated after you eat? Like, feel free. If you relate to that, I mean, please let us know. But go ahead. Were you going to add more?
No.
Okay.
So again, I think it's important to really know yourself because I work with those who have SIBO IBS, and a lot of those with gut issues, as studies show, are more prone to having experienced trauma and having experienced mental emotional stressors, which can influence your gut, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. But it really is important to look for a care team who can validate that. And if your providers have had what I call health privilege, and it's not their fault, right? I'm glad for those who have had health privilege who maybe have never lived with GI issues, have never loved anyone with GI issues. They really may not be able to relate to what you are experiencing and what you're living through. So, that can always be something you're asking your providers. What is your personal experience with this? Do you have a personal interest in your specialty? But we certainly were our very own first patients.
And that's why, guys, and this is important context because you see this. We're on Instagram and you see everyone's kind of persona of everything's perfect and we're happy and we're so healthy. So, when our patients
Yes.
understand what Dahlia's been through, what I've been through, they go, "Oh my gosh, you just weren't always like this. You just weren't born to a family. Our parents were dietitians, integrative functional doctors or dietitians, and we're just born into this." No, like it was a journey. So what you see online isn't always just this perfect this perfect place or family, but we do our best to actually live it and walk it because we've been through such a journey. So that's why this context is important, and because all of you can relate to this. Either you are suffering with a chronic disease, or you know someone suffering with a chronic disease,
Prevent it.
or you want to prevent chronic disease. So that's where we've created Married to Health to be that, which came from our health stories and what we do. And that's why we provide the services. We provide telehealth. We're being more active on the regenerative farm programs, memberships, and so much more. So this didn't just come as like, oh, we're perfect and we want to start this and just give it to you all. No, this came from we were in pain and we struggled and we researched and we now listen to our patients and go, oh, you want a membership? Oh, you want to be on the farm with us learning about regenerative nutrition and gut health and soil health? Then we provide that, right? So everything we do comes from a need, and it comes from listening to our patients and understanding our community and our patients. So and just to add, yeah, so it is this idea. One thing we believe, the most important ecosystem on the planet is your gut microbiome. And just to, I know we talked about this a lot more in our last year, but I really have to put this point across where so much of us are maybe frustrated, so much of us are maybe overwhelmed, maybe even a little angry at our health, at the world, but really we contain this beautiful world right inside of us. It is the gut microbiome. It is its own world and it's unique to you. You are not just unique based on your personality and your genetics. You're unique based on the microbes that live inside of you. And it is so, so important. You are so, so important because there's no other microbiome like yours on this planet. It is in and of itself its own little planet. And so we try to connect those dots with food, with farm, with the soil, with your health, and just continue on this journey so you understand that and appreciate that. So it's very important. And luckily, we are not just on this journey alone. So this is our whole team of registered dietitians. So they're all integrative and have different specialties. So we just try to provide the best we can. So I say this because so many come on here and we love everyone who's on here and we love so many in our community, but we didn't just want to be like, hey, we're going to talk to you about this and good luck. Or like, hey, we wrote a book on this, good luck. It's like, no, we're going to talk about this. We're going to write blogs and books, but we're also going to provide you with one-on-one help with this. So if you're like, hey, I listen to talks and podcasts and conferences and read books, and I'm still confused, like this is overwhelming. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is likely overwhelming. And that's okay. You're going to be here for 2 hours on top of other hours. You likely will need one-on-one help, and we provide that on top of everything else. So that's a big important point we want to get across. So we're not just going to be like, good luck, see you next year, right? No, it is we help patients on a day-to-day basis. That is what we do. That is what we love to do. So getting into the topic now, confusion creates illusion. So let me know in the comments if you're a little confused out there, right? Because if I'm on Instagram or social media for 1 minute, it's like raw milk and no, not raw milk, it's going to kill you. No, eat grains. No, grains are going to kill you. And no, carnivore. No, go plant-based. No, it's so much confusion. And some of it is intentional, some of it is a byproduct, but ultimately, it is somewhat to create an illusion because now there's so much wiggle room where this person can make lots of money selling you something and this person can make lots of money and everyone's confused and no one knows what to believe and when you feel that way you tend to want to just like I give up, forget it, right?
And that certainly applies to the gut because there's so many factors that go into the gut. It's like James said, its own little ecosystem. So a lot of the times we'll try to throw in an antibiotic into the ecosystem and just expect it to magically balance out all the different types of microbes that live in there because we have bacteria, we have fungi, we have parasites, we have something called archaea, we have protozoa or parasites. So there's a lot of different types of microbes in there. And sometimes throwing in one herb one antibiotic, one probiotic is not going to necessarily take care of that delicate balance between all those different members of that biome. It's not necessarily going to help with the flow of those bugs. It's not necessarily going to help with that barrier, the home, the gut lining of those bugs. We're seeing that people are already asking questions, and these are quite involved, right? And there's
Hmm.
a lot of confusion here. I have Hashimoto's, an autoimmune condition. I have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I'm allergic to rifaximin, the main antibiotic that's used for it, and the elemental diet, another option that some providers use, which is basically a starve them out diet. Antimicrobials were not effective. What can I do besides practically fasting? So that's a lot of confusion there of, I thought this would work, then that, then that, then that. It didn't work for me, but I still have clearly this dysbiosis, this gut imbalance, an autoimmune involvement, which, pretty much all autoimmune disease begins in the gut. So there's still issues this person is experiencing with their barrier, with their balance,
Hmm.
with probably their motilities. And there is so much confusion in that because you have a lot of self-proclaimed experts out there. You have a lot of really well-intentioned providers out there, a lot of different guidelines. So it's really knowing, okay, what do you do when you find yourself so deep in it? How did you get there? And what can you do to make your way out on the other end? And we're hearing now a lot of people, especially people online, saying things like, you don't need plants. Fiber is not essential. When I cut out plants 100% and I stopped eating fiber, my gut issues were healed. And so we want to dive into that. We want to give more context behind that.
Yeah, and let us know, guys, in the comments if you've heard that, if you see that. So that's one of the big questions. And are plants needed for a healthy gut? And we would say yes. And why is that? Well, I mean, majority of the research, so we could sit here and the 2 hours could be us going through just research articles and clinical trials and epidemiology. But, what we'll show you here is there's great studies all the way to as soon as last year to even the 80s, and like wonderful studies showing the importance of fiber. Fiber being on the cusp of being the essential carbohydrate, where we have essential fatty acids and we have essential amino acids. What that means is we essentially need to get them from our diet. Our bodies don't produce them, so we have to get them externally. Fiber is that. We don't make fiber. We're not plants, right? Plants have fiber. So fiber is there not just for us, but for our microbes, which are then for us, right? So it's like an indirect way. And with all these studies, because there's so many cool studies here, whether it's looking at populations or it's looking at the actual genetics of the microbes and going, when we eat plants, wow, these microbes thrive. And oh, when we eat plants, these microbes provide us with gifts like B12 and short chain fatty acids. And there's really cool things. And so, kind of all that, a lot of it at least, can be summed up in this graph where we're seeing like more fiber in your diet increases function in your microbiome, increases short chain fatty acids and enzymes, right? Increases diversity of all these microbes. And what we're seeing, whether it's in your colon, a lot of this is done in the colon because we do research on stool, but it's really from mouth to anus, right? So if you hear of people with esophageal disease, like a big common one is EOE, if you've heard of that, that is affected by what you're eating and what you're doing, right? And obviously, it continues, right? And each kind of chamber of our gut is its own little ecosystem being helped and affected by what we're doing. And a lot of it, a common denominator in what we're seeing, whether you're looking at populations living to 100 or populations with lower GI disease or just lower chronic disease in general, plants are in that common denominator, right? We're eating more plants, they're able to ferment more plants, they just have a bigger variety of plants. So, for so many reasons, in so many studies, plants are needed and extremely, extremely helpful. And so, getting a little deeper into that, we've seen it in this really cool study that was done on animals, but it was done transplanting a human microbiome into an animal microbiome. We're seeing that a fiber-rich diet protected your gut lining. We're seeing that a fiber-rich diet really helps, and which is essentially saying we can call it a fiber-rich diet, we can call it eating more plants and a plant-based diet, and just and having that a regular on a regular basis is helping to protect this layer. And essentially, what this graphic is just showing is that you have this layer, which we're going to get into and explain a little bit more, but you have this layer in your gut that can get degraded over time. And a big prevention tool for that is eating plants, right? And
Mhm.
we know that. We've seen that in study after study, whether it's an animal study, like this one's just really cool, or it's a human study, or it's a randomized control trial. We've seen that over and over again. So very important to know
And the
that.
reason why this study was so important for us to understand is because a lot of people don't realize how delicate the gut barrier is, right? We have our gut epithelia, which basically means our gut skin that comprises our gut, our entire GI tract. And that's again, like James mentioned, mouth to anus. And I think most people I talk to, and I always tell my patients this, right? Most people have seen what the liver looks like, what the heart and the brain looks like. These are solid, dense organs that are muscles, and they're
Mhm.
full of fibrous tissue and nerves. That is not what your gut is. Your gut is a hollow organ. It is one cell layer thick. It is 1 millimeter thick. It is thinner than our external skin, our external epidermis. And so that's delicate for such an important organ that handles our digestion. A large percentage, 80+% of our immune cells, it handles our motility, and then it connects to pretty much all of our systems, our endocrine system, our cardiometabolic system, our cardiovascular system. So many systems are influenced by the gut. So it's like, why is it so delicate and fragile? Well, we rely on this mucosal barrier, this thick protective layer of mucus. Not only does that ensure the right things stay in the gut and the wrong things stay out of the gut so our immune system doesn't get confused and trigger autoimmunity, it also does things like blunt the force that the nerves feel, because secondary to your spinal cord, your gut is the second most innervated or nerve rich part in your entire body. So imagine if all those nerves were just right out there by this basically paper mache, let's be honest. They're going
Yeah.
to feel every bit of gas, every movement of stool, every time you're digesting something. So you need this mucus to really create that barrier so those nerves aren't sensing all of that movement. And I have so many patients who tell me they can feel everything. They are awoken every night because they can feel the stool moving through their system, or they can feel every time they have gas. And it's not just uncomfortable, it's painful for them because that mucus barrier has been degraded heavily by bugs basically eating away at it. And we know if fiber keeps that mucosal barrier rich, fibrous foods and specific types of fibrous foods that contain certain types of starches and carbohydrates, especially resistant starches, those keep that mucus barrier thick and healthy. The bugs will keep their own home well maintained, just like we do, right? We're not over here breaking walls and, breaking down doors. We want to live in a healthy home. So do your gut bugs. So they're going to keep that layer, that protective layer for them very healthy if you're giving them the right tools in order to do so. So they want that layer to be thick and rich. But when you're in survival, you're going to look around and use the resources around you. And that's what they do as well. So they will eat this layer of mucus. It's rich in carbohydrates, like I was mentioning. It's rich in starch. It
Mhm.
does contain some iron, some vitamins, some minerals, a little bit of fat in that layer as well. So if they're in starvation mode and they're in famine, they will feast on that mucus first and foremost. So while maybe additional fiber in the diet may trigger some symptoms, which we'll get into, not eating the fiber doesn't solve everything. If anything, that can lead you to autoimmune disease very soon. It can lead you to more serious conditions very soon. So we really want to emphasize this, that a no fiber diet is not the way to go. And really, we follow, some of these carnivore influencers just because it's important to know what's being put out there and what's being said. And you see the ones who have been long-term carnivore have slowly over the last few years said, okay, I couldn't just eat meat only. I started adding fruit. I started adding a little bit of vegetables. I'm going to start adding seeds, and they'll start adding nuts. So it's
Mhm.
not long term. It's not a sustainable way of eating because your bugs need that fiber. You may think you don't, but they do.
Right. And then this would be, Yeah, so this is going more into what Dahlia was mentioning, the lumen, the outer mucosal layer, inner mucosal layer. So that mucus is really thicker.
And
So
that's the green.
those little dots here, so these little cells, that's the cells. Your mucus layer is way more, about 10 to 20 times thicker than the actual cells of your gut. So we are really relying on that mucus layer to be that extra protection, to be that buffer, to be just that cushion that we rely on. And when you don't have plants, you don't have fiber, and you lose that extra protection, that cushion. And we feel this and you see this. That's why those of you, if you are suffering with chronic GI issues, if you do have IBS or something diagnosed, it's easier for you to get a cold. It's easier for you to get COVID. It's
Hmm.
easier for you to get other diseases.
Yes.
And pretty soon you can find yourself also with autoimmune and immune system issues and the rabbit hole. And unfortunately, that hole just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it gets harder to get out of.
Hmm.
So here's just a really a visual representation of what we explained. So it is like this spiral. So essentially, this is like the gut microbiome spiral, and here it is. Great. So again, the gut microbiome is the nexus of all health on the planet because everything spirals from it. Everything comes from the gut microbiome. And so when we do go and we see like positivity. We'll talk about the negativity a little bit, but that'll be later. But this healthy gut microbiome spiral is why you'll see someone and go like, "Oh my gosh, you're so fertile. You have like 5 kids, right?" Because one area is going to the uterus and the skin, and you're like, again, this is where some of your genetics and your individualization comes in, right? We always say we all look like fingers, but when we get close, we have unique fingerprints. The gut is the same, and it interacts on such a high level all the way out to like our skin and even our fertility. It can also go out into the mesentery system and the spleen, where like you, even when you do eat maybe rotten food, you don't get food poisoning as easily because you have other ancillary organs that are just healthier and well maintained. This goes to then when you're healthy and your gut's healthy, you're healthy to your community. I don't know if you guys can see up here. I have even dots that go outside of the body, right? So beyond your spouse and your children, your home, your community, right? If you're feeling healthy, maybe you're more active on the PTA or in your church, right? Everything is connected to this nexus, right? To the starting point, which is your gut. And that will enable you to do everything from be more fertile or have great skin to also be more active in your community, right? If you're feeling good. So this is where it all intersects and why it's so, so important. So, next question. Do plants have toxins that destroy the gut? We see this. This is kind of
Mm.
hand in hand with don't eat plants or plants are bad or some of the main questions like how much fiber plants do I eat plants? Oh, but plants have toxins, right? They have toxins and we shouldn't eat them. Not exactly, right? So the correct term is anti-nutrients that are out there, but I mean, and the even more correct terms would be just getting into the nitty-gritty of it, and they're like lectins and oxalates and phthalates. And so maybe you've heard of this, maybe not. So we'll see in the Q&A later and in the comments. But I think many of us more now than ever have heard of anti-nutrients, and it's a big kind of selling point of a lot of the confusion of going, you shouldn't eat these plants because they have anti-nutrients. These anti-nutrients chemically bind to your nutrients. These anti-nutrients have some enzymes that degrade your nutrients and cause you problems, right? So you may find that, but there's important context here because so many of the foods and really all of the foods that have these anti-nutrients are some of the healthiest foods out there for you to be eating. So like what is it, how does this make any sense, right? What is the point here? And so the point is that in many studies, and just, I mean, so many studies out there, but really, it is even just logically putting it as that these anti-nutrients don't stay the same, right? You don't eat oxalate and it stays exactly the same. And you're not just eating the oxalate by itself. You're not buying a bottle of oxalates and going, yum, and let me eat the oxalates. No, the oxalates are in the spinach. The oxalates are in the legume. And so what we do is we usually soak these legumes. We usually cook these foods. The foods in and of itself that we're mixing together have enzymes in it and have a synergistic effect. We also ferment. For thousands of years, we've been fermenting and processing foods in a minimal way that are really, really good for us. And we're finding out more and more that, wow, fermenting and kind of just slightly naturally chemically altering these foods are amazing. And the oxalates and the lectins and all these anti-nutrients don't stay the same.
Mhm. And we kind of call this concept pre-digesting, right? When you're doing things like soaking your legumes or your whole grains, when you are freezing them, even when you are cooking or even pressure cooking, and when you are blending them, you are breaking down some of these carbohydrates or even some of these carbohydrate binding proteins, which is what some of these things are: lectins, oxalates, salicylates. These are types of carbohydrate binding proteins. And so, again, they are denatured or they are broken down in a majority of cases in advance. Some of the foods
Mhm.
that have the highest amount of these compounds, for example, lectin rich foods like kidney beans have a high amount of these certain compounds. Kidney beans, for example, have hemagglutinins. And so
You guys know that, right? Hemagglutinin.
hemagglutinin.
Yeah, you know.
So one raw kidney bean has about 20,000 to 70,000 hemagglutinin units. But when you cook it, it only has 200 to 400. So again, you're drastically decreasing these. And then not only did cooking do that, your stomach acid will further do that. Your digestive enzymes in your saliva, your small intestine from your pancreas are further going to do that. So there's no real data to show. I know there was sensationalism to say, but that's where we ask, show me the data, right? There was sensationalism to say, just cut out lectins, your life will improve, right? Buy these $100 lectin pills and you'll be fine. But there's no data to show that eating more lectins even influences marked inflammatory markers, right? There have been studies, randomized control crossover trials, where they measured C-reactive protein, which is one of the most common inflammatory markers that can be measured. We have three main inflammatory markers we can measure in healthcare: homocysteine, sedimentation rate, C-reactive protein. And in this study that was very well designed, they took two groups of people and they fed one whole grains and they asked the second group to eat zero grains. The group who ate whole grains reduced their C-reactive protein by 21%. So their inflammatory marker went down when eating these, lectins and phytates and oxalates by 21%. Then, when they switched them over, because again, it was a crossover trial, so they asked them, okay, grain eating group, stop eating grains. We're going to measure again after a few weeks your C reactive protein. When they stopped eating grains, their C reactive protein went back up by 12%. So, not only did they have a marked decrease of their inflammatory markers when eating these compounds, they had a negative deleterious effect when they took them away. Another randomized control trial on legumes had one group who ate 4 servings of legumes every single week. The other group ate none. And then not at the as they measured the markers, the legume consuming group lost more weight despite the fact that they were eating more calories. They lowered their C-reactive protein, again, their inflammatory marker, by 40%. They lowered their blood pressure and they lowered their cholesterol. So not only is there no evidence to that, we're seeing in these very well designed trials, these crossover trials, there is marked decreased inflammation. And inflammation is a hallmark sign of autoimmune disease, either that's present or autoimmune disease
Mhm.
to come. And then, we can say just with population data, in the all 5 blue zones, they're heavy consumers of lectins and oxalates and nightshades. And as we, as a society in the US, have consumed fewer and fewer of these compounds, we've had worse and worse health. Because studies show we are consuming, on average, the fewest amount of beans we ever have. About 50 years ago, we were consuming, on average, 8 pounds of beans per capita per person in the US. Now we're down to 6 pounds of beans, and I wouldn't say that we're any healthier for it. If anything, we're seeing more GI issues, more cancer, more chronic disease. So, are these really the culprits? And is cutting these out really healing one, or is it just a temporary relief in symptoms? Because there's a huge difference in those two.
And just a comment, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but there's many out there, luckily and thankfully, and maybe you've heard it here at The Real Truth About Health, saying eat more beans. Where we come in and where we're a little bit unique and different is that we understand there's some of you who can't. And so that's important. And so, but it's not that you can't because it's the beans' fault. It's that you can't because it's your gut microbiome that needs some help. And with
Mhm.
the right help, then you can eat the beans. That's the important context. So, yes, if you remember nothing else, you need eat more beans. That's a great thing to remember. But also know that you maybe come from a long generation of IBS in your great grandma and your grandma and your mom and so on and so forth, and a lot of gut trauma and maybe even emotional trauma and so many other factors. And beans are just not sitting well with you. Again, it's not the beans' fault. It's also not your fault. There's things we can do though to help your
Yeah.
gut, and then you can add the beans back in. It's not to then just demonize the beans or the food in and of itself.
But if you do need some help, definitely incorporate some of these pre-digestion tips. So again, soak things, pressure cook them instead of just cooking them on the stove,
Mhm.
blend things and freeze things, and that will reduce the work that your gut is having to do.
Yes. Okay. Is IBS and overall GI issues caused by plants? So hopefully by now you kind of know the answer to this a little bit, but when we're talking about the cause, right? So this is where I was getting with that is understanding the beans are not the cause, the broccoli is not the cause. So this is a big no, right? The plants do not cause the GI issues. So what causes like IBS and overall GI issues? There's a lot of things, and I'll maybe start. One of my favorite sides is this one here, is kind of getting into a little bit of the environment. I love that aspect of this. The exposome is the more research and medical term for this. This is like everything you're exposed to, everything that you come across does affect your body. And so when we look at the smaller circle here, this pre-industrial age, we were connected, right? It was the human microbiome, and we'd have a poo, and we'd probably do the poo right in our backyard. We called them outhouses, but even before, we would dig a hole in the dirt and go right in the dirt. There's still many countries who do that. And then we're actually using that same dirt to grow food. Again, not the same day. It takes some time to process. Now there are farmers who do that. It's called human manure. It's you take healthy manure from animals, including humans, and you use it to grow food. Then you get the plant microbiome, and then you eat the plant, right? And so we're in this cycle. We're in this direct connection of what we eat goes back into our environment. We're in the environment, we eat, and it repeats again, right? When we get into the industrial revolution, right, you see a lot of these factors come in, right, where you're getting into the antibiotics and the pesticides, and now we do our poo in the water, right? We do our business, we flush it away. We don't know where it goes. We don't know what happens to it. We have our soil, but maybe we grow on soil that's been tainted. Maybe we grow on soil that's been obliterated with fertilizers and pesticides. We get the plant from Trader Joe's or we order it express delivery and it's wrapped in plastic and we eat it, right? And we're very disconnected from the whole thing. So there's so many inputs here, and I'll maybe let Dahlia speak to this other big graphic on just all these inputs that then just kind of exacerbate the gut over time and just kind of lead into a lot of these issues, the actual cause of
Yes.
these
And we
issues.
are not saying industrialization to
Yeah,
a certain degree is doing that, because it is nice to have sanitized restroom
totally.
facilities, to have a bowel movement. And it is very much helped with our health overall to eliminate that exposure to certain unhealthy microbes. So that is definitely not the point of that. But like James said, we have become highly disconnected from our foods for the most part. And what we do know is that does have its ramifications. The further and further we are from our soil microbiome, the more and more affected our gut microbiome is, where when we're eating fewer plants, usually it's displaced by something else. So when you're eating less whole plants, usually you're eating more protein and you're eating more saturated fat. A lot of the times then the diet comes with ultra hyper processed foods, whether that is something like an ultra hyper processed protein bar or other sources of ultra processed carbohydrates, proteins, or fats. Um, that then will kind of shift our own digestive juices and our own digestive fluids. When we are increasing our saturated fat intake, that will affect our bile acid production. Because when we eat and we chew our food, we begin digestion in the mouth. Our saliva is breaking things down. Then it goes into our stomach where our stomach acid breaks things down. And so when we're more removed from our food, those things can be affected, where we might have an altered pH of our stomach acid or our gut as a whole. Our bile acid then comes in after the food is broken down in the stomach and prepared for digestion and absorption in the small intestine. Bile acid is necessary for that. And we also have pancreatic enzymes at that time that are necessary for that. Those things can drastically change based on what you're putting into them. For example, again, like I mentioned, that excess saturated fat intake can upregulate and increase production of what's called secondary bile acids, which lead to higher inflammation in the intestines. And those can definitely affect that mucosal barrier we were talking about, the gut lining, as we were talking about as well. We've seen also high intakes of fructose, which is a fruit sugar, which can be highly processed. That can be also altered, that can also alter liver function and bile acid production. Not only that, but then we're altering stomach acid levels as well with throwing in things like proton pump inhibitors. A very large percentage of Americans are taking proton pump inhibitors. It is one of the most commonly prescribed drugs in the United States. Most people taking a proton pump inhibitor, a PPI, don't realize that you're only recommended to take it up to 3 months. Even the package insert says that. The manufacturers themselves say that on the package insert, not recommended to be utilized longer than 3 months. We all know people who have been on it for 3 decades. I've certainly had patients who tell me that, like, what do you mean I'm not going to take my PPI? I've taken it for years and years and decades and decades. So again, when it's one of the most commonly prescribed drugs, when such a high percentage of Americans are using these drugs, that will have its downstream ramifications. Because if part one part of that digestion is not happening, all the others will be altered and affected as well. If you don't have enough saliva to break down and chew your food because of whatever condition, dehydration, certain autoimmune conditions like Sjogren's, that will affect then how that food meets your stomach. If you don't
Mhm.
have enough stomach acid, that will affect how that food can go into your small intestine. Without enough acid, you're not triggering strong signals to the pancreas and to the liver and gallbladder to say, hey, your turn, you produce what you need to produce. So these things have downstream effects. And then we know things like antibiotics are going to further affect things lower down in the small intestine, certainly in the large intestine as well, where the bugs will be off. And then the things that the bugs need to help control, like inflammatory markers, short chain fatty acid production, um, production of something that's inflammatory called lipopolysaccharide. That will have its effects not only on the gut, but like I said, to all the systems that connect to the gut, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, your neurologic system. All of these things will be then affected, where we see increased risk for diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease. So it's so, so, so important to be more connected with the food in order to help balance out those microbes.
Yes. And so this is just another visualization, like we said, IBS, lack of fiber, antibiotics, maybe not breastfeeding as well, environmental toxins. I mean, there's so many things. And again, this isn't to be a downer. There's hope with all of
Yes,
this,
we'll get to that.
and we'll definitely get to that. But it's being aware, right? It's being aware
Mhm.
of these factors. It's understanding the whole point with this. The original point is going plants do not cause this, right?
Mhm.
There's so many other causes
Too
that
many factors at play.
it's like plants, and really it's the lack of plants that we know is a cause, not the plants itself. So to clarify that, to really hammer that in, it's very, very important.
Mhm.
Okay. And again, to tie it back because it's important, again, your stomach lining, your modified epithelial cells, this mucosal layer is dependent on you eating plants. It's dependent on this because as you continue, or as these factors, and you're maybe focused on the broccoli and beans, being like, I hate those are bad. But you're not focused on the environmental toxins or the stress or the other factors that are actually causing this damage. And on top of that, you're maybe moving away from fiber-rich foods. You're on an elimination diet, so this is even happening at a more rapid pace. So this is what we call a perfect storm. We see this a lot in college kids actually that come into our practice where
Mm.
they kind of are getting into the real world. They're like, "Oh my gosh, college. I took out a loan and oh my gosh, I have to cook for myself.
And
I
study.
moved away from home. I study." It's like life is hitting them all at once. They're no longer in high school. And we're seeing that even in high school, they were eating Kraft mac and cheese and drinking artificial colors and doing all these things that aren't conducive to gut health. And then they're thrown into the real world with all the stress and all the responsibilities. And we see their guts start to crack a little bit.
And a lot of the times that comes coupled with a lot more ultra refined food than they were eating when they lived at home. They're going out to eat a lot more, getting fast food. Maybe they're eating in the college dining hall and maybe not making the most nutritious choices. And a lot
Right.
of the times we know they're binge drinking as well. So this is when a lot of autoimmune diseases are being diagnosed. This is why we're seeing that those
Mhm.
aged 20 to 50 are the fastest rising group of colon cancer. So again, right perfectly in that college age where a lot of this inflammatory cascade is being induced.
Mhm.
So definitely something that can be prevented, but plants are key.
And this very much connecting a big question we get, why do I feel worse after eating plants? So maybe you've heard other doctors and dietitians or people who write books or at a conference say, eat more plants, eat more beans, eat more
Mhm.
fiber. Okay, great. Bye. And like that's it. But it's like, why do I feel worse? Right.
You might
So,
go home, you might try. After this conference, you're probably going to try, but you might find I'm more gassy, I'm more bloated, I have more indigestion, I have more discomfort after
right,
I'm trying to add these plants. Why is this happening?
right.
So,
So I like to just give a quick analogy, and I know
mhm,
there's a lot to go into here, but the quick analogy is thinking of your gut microbiome, and again from mouth to anus as this beautiful factory line. You're producing things. You're a producer. You're making short chain fatty acids and proteins and vitamins and minerals. Your gut is very active. There's a lot going on here. And so it's important to understand that this has been going on from the second you were born, from the second you were exposed to microbes, even in the womb, from the second your mother gave you her microbiome, either through delivery or kisses or hugs or breast milk, whatever it is, this factory turned on. This factory is still to this day, right now, as you're breathing, as you're listening, producing and making and making. And so, you know, you have to keep this factory going. You have to understand that these little guys and these products are vital to your health and are extremely, extremely important. So, all that to say is your factory can be off a little bit, right? That's not to say that the inputs are necessarily off, but maybe one of the wheels here are broken. Maybe too many people, too many of your people here, in this case, microbes, have called out sick. Or maybe there's too much of one type of worker when you need a better variety of workers. So this analogy will come back into play as we continue, but understanding that is very much key. And so this factory is what we've been showing you. So again, we kind of leave in some of the pictures before, but also some new pictures where we're seeing how then nutrients affect this. And that's essentially what we're absorbing and making. It's all the polyphenols and vitamins and minerals we're consuming. Why are we eating the apple? Why are we even saying to eat the kidney bean in the first place? Why eat the kale and the spinach, chickpea? The list can go on and on. It's because we need proteins and we need the vitamins and we need the phytonutrients. but it is this gut and this beautiful layer and the ecosystem in there that's going to help you actually absorb these nutrients. So these are in this graphic here to the right, these are nutrient fortifying
Nutrients that
nutrients that
fortify.
fortify, I mean. And these are nutrients that damage that we know, right? So like too much alcohol or sugar alcohols or emulsifiers and like Dolly mentioned, fructose and the high fructose corn syrup. And so all of these things are not only going to directly damage, but like we showed you in the previous study, support also microbes that like to damage, support an environment that favors inflammation and damage, right? So it's much more than just, yeah, than just saying, oh, it's going to damage. It creates an environment of damage that's very difficult to sometimes make a U-turn and turn in the other direction.
And
Yeah.
then, that is also involved in turning on certain genes. And sometimes once certain
Mhm.
genes turn on, it can be more difficult to turn them off. So it's nice not to poke the bear in the first place, to let them be, leave them off, and really provide these nutrients that your body is looking for, all of which can be acquired in a variety of plant foods. So whether that's fiber or glutamine or vitamin D or these other amino acids like cysteine and tryptophan, vitamin A, these can all be acquired through a variety of plant foods.
And so this is where we get into the gut microbiome disease spiral. So the spiral is still the same, right? And everyone's spiral can be a little bit different and it can be positive. This is where it can get a little negative, right? Where depending on your family history and your actions and where you live, again, all the factors we were talking about, you then start to notice some issues with the pancreas and the liver if we follow one track, right? And if you're male, that then eventually leads to prostate issues and all these things. And it just kind of sends this diffusion and cascade outward. Again, this might not be you, but this is someone, right? This is where you go, my friend can eat at McDonald's every day and they're fine. Whereas I do that and I have a stomach ache, right? But your friend maybe has eczema or maybe has other issues going on that aren't necessarily beginning with stomach symptoms necessarily, but they're maybe starting with something else, right? We all know many of our patients come to us and have bladder issues, right? They have irritable
Mm,
bladder and they
interstitial cystitis.
interstitial cystitis. And so they essentially are having those issues first and foremost without realizing, oh, I've also been constipated or I've also had other GI issues that I didn't notice, but the bladder was screaming most. And that's because we're all unique fingerprints. Remember, we all have light switches in different places, and our lifestyle and actions will kind of turn on those light switches individually and uniquely. And so it's important to understand you can have a unique cascade in a positive way and also in a negative way. So very important there.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to talk about, so maybe you're experiencing some of these GI symptoms, the gas, the bloat, the indigestion, the brain fog, the fatigue. When should you be concerned about them?
Hmm.
And really, what we say is we don't want you to even experience the symptoms. We want to
Yeah.
prevent them. So that way they never even have a chance to manifest. They never have a chance to begin. So we know, again, eating that variety of plant foods is key. So key studies have shown that those eating a wide variety of plants, and in fact, it didn't make it into there, but it literally just came out. A new study that studied
Mhm.
over 21,000 individuals and took stool samples and microbiome samples from them, showed those who were on a vegan or plant-rich omnivorous diet, even a vegetarian diet, had healthier microbiomes. So those
Mhm.
who were eating the highest number of plants had a microbiome and certain species in their gut that favored an anti-inflammatory environment. So when we're eating the whole grains, the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, the beans, the seeds, the legumes, herbs, and spices, that's going to favor, like we mentioned, those bugs that will act like firemen and firefighters, and really come in and decrease and extinguish that inflammation instead of that alternate and that other side that will trigger that inflammatory cascade. So you might be finding yourself in that. Maybe you have already been diagnosed or you're
Yeah.
suspicious you have IBS, like I did again. But how do you know if you do or not? So IBS is diagnosed, and you do need a practitioner who can diagnose, right? So you need to see a physician, a gastroenterologist, a nurse practitioner, physician's assistant who can kind of take into account, do you have recurrent abdominal pain at least once a week on average in the last 3 months? Do you simultaneously have at least two of the other three of these? Change in pain related to your bowel movements. Do you feel your bowel movements? Is it painful to empty your bowels? Do you get sweaty, shaky, um, uncomfortable before, during, or after a bowel movement? Are bowel movements just uncomfortable for you? Did you have a change in stool frequency, whether it's you went from going every day to now going 3 times a week or once a week, or maybe you're going 12 times a day? Or did the stool form and appearance just kind of change? Maybe you used to have those healthy, beautiful, solid snake-like type fours, and now you're seeing they look like little rabbit pellets, or maybe they look like soft serve or just liquid in the toilet bowl. Those things are qualifying factors to be diagnosed with IBS. But I like to say IBS is BS, right? We're not going to just be like, here's your diagnosis. You already knew these things, but I'm going to give you a label for it. Good luck. I really am not satisfied with leaving someone at an IBS diagnosis. It's always, for me as an integrative practitioner, going deeper and really figuring out, why do you have some of these symptoms that we're talking about here? Why do you have lower abdominal pain or discomfort? Why has your stool been changed in frequency or appearance or comfort level? Why maybe are you passing mucus in the stool? Why are you bloated and gassy? Maybe it is something a little bit more involved. And we know more recently, especially in the last decade or so, we're identifying that one common kind of hallmark in IBS is imbalance, that dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means imbalance of the bugs that are living in the gut, whereas eubiosis is a nice balance. So maybe the bugs are imbalanced, and these bugs all produce their gases. We know they can produce hydrogen, some produce methane gas, some produce hydrogen sulfide gas, some will produce benzoic acid or carbon dioxide. All of these will make you feel differently. And we're going to talk about a few of these in particular. But maybe you're noticing, I don't think this is normal, where it's not like once every 3 months I have a stomach ache. It's once a day I have a stomach ache at least. Or my bloating is not just, oh, okay, I'm a little uncomfortable. It's my pants don't fit by the end of the day. I have so many patients who tell me that. I have a, a PM wardrobe and an AM wardrobe because what I put on in the morning doesn't fit me at night anymore.
Yeah.
So we're noticing their bloat is not just regular bloat. It's going from a 0 or 1 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10 by the end of the night, or a 9 out of 10 by the end of the night. So this is not just typical. Their gas is excessive, more than 15 to 20 times a day, or it's trapped, where it's again just accumulating and they're becoming more and more visibly distended throughout the day. Um, they could have spontaneous or uncomfortable belching, and then still some of those other signs. So that's when we say, that's not mild, that's life altering.
Mhm.
Let's really look in deeper and see if you have something called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Or there's different types where it could be large intestinal microbial overabundance as well. But we want to know, do you have too many of these bugs who are making this gas that's causing discomfort inside of your gut? Let's try to identify them and let's see what they're doing. Studies show 14 to 70% of IBS may actually be SIBO. So you could have that dysbiosis. And that could come with its issues of motility, and then that ultimately will cause barrier issues as well. But we want to know, do you have an overabundance of these bugs that can produce these different gases?
And so this is where it gets to another big question or realization or even just confusion where there's common symptoms many do not realize are connected to
Mm.
GI issues, right? So, and really for us, spoiler alert, kind of all symptoms are connected to your gut in one way or another. But when it comes to very serious GI issues, like even SIBO can be very serious. There are many of our patients with SIBO who can not go to work, who cannot function, who cannot show up for their family or their
Mhm.
spouse. And so it can get very, very serious.
I had a 12-year-old boy yesterday who's been out of school since
Mm,
December. So can't even go to school because of these debilitating GI symptoms that unfortunately are still taboo and people are not
yeah.
comfortable sharing. So these are causing people to really, really live their lives in a much different way.
And I'm seeing comments, and just so we know,
Hmm.
we do see your comments. That I saw that one comment of saying one of the doctors dismissing some of these and
Hmm.
saying it's BS, or I saw one of those comments. So we're gonna see these comments. Or I know we're gonna be doing a Q&A later, so I believe we can save these and we will answer these questions. We're seeing them come in. We do see your comments, but yeah, we know the frustration. We've lived the frustration. We see the frustration in our parents and even the kids that come through our practice. And so there are common symptoms many do not realize are connected. And so to kind of go into that, this is where histamines really do shine. And I'll kind of, and this is where there are some complexities, but getting into
Yeah.
some of those symptoms.
So as we're talking about, deeper and deeper gut imbalances, all these factors will influence how your immune system is behaving and your immune system is responding. So we know certain, even normal healthy bacteria, let's take Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is one of the most commonly known bacterial strains, that can release certain immune chemicals to just communicate with your immune system, including histamine. So, depending on the balance of bugs in your gut, you could either be breaking down histamine with those bugs, you could be releasing a large amount of histamine with the bugs. And depending on your histamine load, it's important to understand how you're managing it because when you are processing food, you're also processing these immune chemicals that can come along with the food and these biogenic amines, as they're called, that can come along with the food. There's certain amino acids, there's certain bioactive compounds that can come in the food. So histamines can be produced by your body or what's called endogenously inside. They can come from the external inside. Right now, we're in spring. Most
Mm.
people are noticing that some are dealing with allergy symptoms, which can be a histamine symptom. So histamines can come from a variety of places. We can make them on our own when our adrenaline rises or our estrogen levels rise. Those things will
Mhm.
release more histamine in the system as well. Or when we're sick, our histamine will rise as well. When we're exposed to mold or mycotoxins, our histamines will rise because our immune system is activated. Those cells that make that, the mast cells, will put out histamine. And we have receptors all throughout our body
Right.
for histamines. We have different types of histamine receptors, one, two, three, and four. And as you see here on this picture on the left, they're pretty much everywhere. There's almost no organ in the body that doesn't have a histamine receptor, meaning they're all going to feel the histamine. So it's important, one, to not be overly producing histamine, two, to be able to denature or break down the histamine that can come in. One very prevalent place that we're seeing that affects this fine balance between how much histamine is coming in, how much histamine is being broken down and put out, is the gut barrier. Our gut barrier, like I mentioned before,
We haven't talked about the gut barrier.
is a source of enzyme production. And not only is that digestive enzyme, so somebody was asking, do we agree with digestive enzyme use? If your gut barrier is damaged, you might need that supplement. But your body should be able to make those digestive enzymes. It might not be
Mhm.
able to because there's damage, but that can affect digestive enzymes. That can affect other types of degrading enzymes as well, like histamine production. So, we are supposed to make these enzymes, the main one being DAO, diamine oxidase, in predominantly the lining of the small intestine. We make some in the liver, and then we'll make some in these other areas. The brain will make some, the kidneys make some as well, but we're making that DAO all throughout the body. There's another histamine degrading enzyme, HNMT, as well. And that's predominantly produced in the liver. So when we're having these imbalances, when we're overwhelming our GI tract or overwhelming our liver, we might not be able to break down histamines. Then you might start noticing more and more of these symptoms, these histamine symptoms that are here in this photo on the right. So you might notice either after eating a certain food, after feeling stressed, maybe after you got COVID. And a lot of these histamine symptoms do go with post COVID syndrome. I do see that in a lot of my patients. My patients who have dysautonomia or dysfunction disorder of the autonomic nervous system, they will experience these histamine symptoms as well, where they're noticing maybe in their a nervous system that they have headaches, migraines, dizziness, brain fog, and they'll notice that's worsened when either they're outside around the histamines, they've eaten the histamines, they're stressed. They might notice after eating or after raising their adrenaline with exercise that their heart is racing to a rate that does not make any sense. They could be upwards of 200 beats per minute just from eating something or from doing some exercise. And they might notice also that they feel really weak, or maybe they even pass out. They might notice the typical respiratory symptoms. I have a lot of people who say, yeah, I don't know why after I eat X, I'm always clearing my throat. I get really congested and then I get post-nasal drip and I'm coughing, I'm clearing my throat. That could be a sign of possible histamine intolerance.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe you get short of breath. Maybe you start sneezing a lot after eating certain foods. Maybe you're seeing it in your skin where you have flushing, reddening, itching, dermatitis, or eczema after certain foods or after a certain illness or after certain exposures. And then a lot of those IBS symptoms, bloating, gas, early satiety, diarrhea, abdominal pain, constipation, nausea, vomiting, those also can be histamine intolerant symptoms. So if you're noticing any of these are rising, this is something to pay attention to. If you say, I never used to be somebody with allergies, and now I have the worst allergy symptoms, or after I had that virus, after I eat the specific food, after I took these certain antibiotics, I really now experience a lot of these symptoms. It's something to bring up with your care team.
We went to Egypt and I haven't
Mhm.
been the same. I got food po and I actually got ocean poisoning in
Mhm.
Egypt when we were snorkeling. I swallowed water and I think you don't want to use Egyptian snorkels. And something happened to me because the next 24 hours was horrible. And if I didn't know what I knew and I didn't have my wife, who's an expert in this, helping me, it would have been longer than 24 hours and
Mm,
possibly a hospital trip because
yeah.
it was bad. But luckily we kind of knew what we're dealing with somewhat, and we had Dahlia Travels. We got to if you ever want to see Dahlia's travel
You
kit,
can. I posted a
follow
few
us
reels on it.
because it is amazing. It will get you through any GI issue you have while traveling. But to say this story and to comment on this, it's important because I've really never been the same. I'm like, man, Egypt really, I mean, I'm a lot healthier. I'm fine now. Not that I still have IBS or issue, but not to get into TMI, but it's like I know my gut before I went to Egypt and I know my gut after Egypt. And it's a different gut a little bit. I'm still healthy. Thank God I still have a healthy gut, but I'm like, you're a little different. You went somewhere and didn't
You've
come
been through
back the
some
same.
things.
You've been through some things. And so we understand, and hopefully you understand, and you're a believer at the end, if not already, but at the end of this presentation, you're going to be like, oh, I get why they're saying the gut is really key to everything in the body and even beyond, because you see what a ripple effect just the gut can have on the rest of your body. And the histamine receptors are proof of that in and of itself, but
Mhm.
there's even more. But there's the histamine receptors alone, and we need a healthy gut microbiome to properly break down histamines. Are, I mean, in and of itself, key and proof that really the gut is connected to your entire body. And symptoms like Dahlia went through just so eloquently and beautifully, you maybe aren't even connecting to your gut, are connected to your gut. So, very
Mhm.
important.
Yes. So, word to the wise. I wouldn't recommend
Which part? The snorkeling in
snorkeling
Egypt?
and
Yeah.
getting water in your mouth. If only someone had told you.
If only my wife had told me. She did not tell me not to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Husbands always listen to your wives, right? Another. So going back to this analogy, the factory line, right? We see a fractured factory line, right? Which a lot of us have, and which for the most part can be inevitable to some degree, but in this modern era, in the first world countries of antibiotics, of all the things we just mentioned, so many of us, most of our children, for example, after 6 months of age, 83+% of children are no longer exclusively breastfeeding. We are busy, we are doing a lot, we are maybe not providing enough resources to moms. That's just one factor, one little piece of this fracture of so many, where now our basically factory or whatever you call it, assembly line is fractured and we're missing some things. Things are falling through the cracks, literally, and
Mm,
in the gut. And we're seeing this. And what can happen over time, and why we say try to avoid this or do your best to get on this sooner rather than later, is if you're looking at the picture to your left, we're seeing again, not only are we relying on production, right, but we're also relying on absorption. We're also relying on this factory line to help us
Mhm.
absorb nutrients that we're eating. It's key for our microbiome to help us absorb. So if left, if this factory line continues to be fractured and things are falling off and being missing, or the microbes are missing, we are then going to become nutrient deficient, which will then lead into a host of other symptoms. And it is, I mean, in theory, and there's some good evidence, but why we're seeing a rise in Alzheimer's, dementia, on top of it being type 3 diabetes, which again, that goes to our liver health and our pancreatic health. But as we start to lose these nutrients over time, even little by little, we will start to see more and more issues kind of compound exponentially on one another. And this factor line cannot continue this way, right? And
Mhm.
just in a way of a actual business, if your business was running fractured, if you were losing people and losing product and not delivering on orders, you'd be out of business, right? And so we don't want that for your health. You don't want that for your gut. You don't want that even more so, and we'll get into for your kids, because what you do now, what you do for your microbiome, whether you have kids, especially if you're living with them, or even if you don't but plan to, you're going to be giving them this microbiome. And so it's a multi-generational effect that is very, very important.
And you have people talking about through the generations, our soil has become less nutrient dense. That is true. We are seeing marked differences in nutrient quality in the soil, but
Mhm.
also there's a factor of our gut and our gut being less resilient and able to even handle the nutrients that are coming in. So while the soil microbiome has changed and people are recognizing that, I see more and more people saying that online, we really need to understand this as well. And that is it's becoming more common, right? Before it was really just, okay, make sure your celiac patients are supplementing with their B12 and their vitamin D and their omega-3 because their gut lining has been affected by their autoimmune condition and the inflammation has destroyed some of their villi in their small intestine, those little absorptive finger-like projections. So make sure they're supplementing, or your IBD patients, there's protocols and there are guidelines for these are the supplements IBD patients need. They need to be taking calcium. They should be taking vitamin D, omega-3, B12. Now we're really seeing so many Americans are living with that intestinal hyperpermeability, that leaky gut, which is kind of the street term for it. But that's going to affect the ability for your factory, your assembly line, like James mentioned, to absorb the nutrients. So if we're already dealing with malnourished soil, and now we have a system that can barely absorb the nutrients, it makes sense why we're seeing chronic disease on the rise. Um,
And so there's so many acronyms here, and you've and maybe you know, but there's many who don't. There's still patients who maybe been with us for a while and are like, wait, what? And it's confusing, right? IBS and SIMO and IMO and all these acronyms. So many still go, what even is this, right? And so we wanted to answer this question as well, like what is IBS and SIBO? And you know the causes, you know what doesn't cause, and so many of these questions are connected. But really quickly, because I know this is a lot of information, this pictures a nice summation in some ways of what this is. And so the symptoms are a product of deforestation of our gut ecosystem, right? If
Mm.
you're an environmentalist, I consider myself an environmentalist. I love the environment. I love to be outdoors and go to different environments. That's why I was snorkeling to visit a new environment. And unfortunately, I got sick, but
You could still
I
snorkel
like
without
I could still snorkel
oh,
without gross stuff. But yeah, but I like ecosystems, and I've understood through all of this research and for doing this for so long that one of the most important ecosystems is our gut ecosystem. So really all of this, whether it's reflux or a lot of these diseases, especially gut diseases, and the doctors are throwing acronyms and you're hearing us speak, really it is just a gut deforestation. It is us slowly, or even many of us quickly, as we give you that college student scenario where it's this perfect storm where they're quickly cutting down the trees of their gut, so to speak, or it's slowly over 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, we are not in a sustainable place in this ecosystem. We're cutting down more trees than we can handle. And it really is a beautiful irony, and it really is a beautiful parallel where we are connected to our environment. Many other doctors and researchers have made these parallels before. We're not the first ones to do it, and but it's a beautiful parallel to go, oh, what we do to the environment is a parallel of what we do to our own gut because they are in communication. They are meant to be in communication. They are meant to be connected, essentially. And when we're disconnected, the same reasons that are disconnecting our bigger environment are the same reasons pretty much that we are disconnecting our micro environment. So you want to love the cuddly creatures, also love the cuddly creatures inside of you. Love yourself, take care of yourself, get help. What you do, and if your gut is healthy, everything else around you will be healthy, including the bigger environment. So,
So it's not just protecting these cute, cuddly bugs, like we were saying. It's also about keeping the other ones in balance on the other side.
yes. And so here again, in keeping with this analogy and just metaphor, is also understanding that when we aren't in balance, when we are creating these unwanted environments, these microbes, there are also microbes that are helpful. Like earlier, I was answering questions on H. pylori and another talk I was giving previously. H. pylori is naturally there, right? E. coli is naturally there.
Mhm.
Candida is naturally there. Every inhale, we are breathing in fungal spores. However, the concentration matters, right? I don't want to breathe in a parts per thousand amount of fungal spores. I want to breathe in a parts per billion, ideally, or less, right? I don't want to have candida run wild. And so when we create an environment, I don't want a bunch of rats in my backyard. I'd rather not have a wolf pack around my neighborhood constantly and I keep throwing raw meat out and I'm going, man, why are there so many wolves? And I keep just throwing raw meat in my backyard. It makes a difference of what we do. So in that sense, wolves are great, rats are great, ants are great, snakes are great. I don't want them in abundance living in my home, right? I want them in balance in nature and us being even more so a part of nature. But I hope you get this analogy and the point where what we do and even the meals and the habits and everything we've been talking about,
Sleep or exercise.
sleep and so much more, will then start to make these get out of balance and
Mhm.
overgrow. And just like the ants, snakes, wolves, and rats, they will take the opportunity to do so if you let them. If you
Mhm.
give them that environment, they are opportunists that will grow. I put the python here because, as you know, in the Florida Everglades, we released a couple of pythons that aren't native there, and now they have an overgrowth of pythons. So much so the government is saying, if you kill a python, we'll pay you money because there's just so many pythons destroying the ecosystem. So there's so many examples of that in the bigger picture. It's also happening in the smaller picture inside of us as well.
But, you just kind of explained it was a cause and effect. They didn't just overgrow for no reason. And, somebody's commenting, but humans took way too much of their habitats. Very true. But that's what happens in the gut as well. You completely shift the habitat, you completely disrupt something, maybe
Hmm.
unintentionally, and then there's overgrowth of these bugs that can be somewhat opportunists. Again, there's nothing wrong with a few little rats here and there. They're not going to bother anybody, but it's when you have a huge overgrowth. So, the same with certain bacteria and microbes in the gut. So, when we're talking about these types of dysbiosis, whether we want to categorize them all under the SIBO bucket, or now we're becoming more picky about what we're calling it because there's no now more types, um, we do know that can kind of offset things as well in the gut. So, we have four main types of microbial imbalance where there's usually overabundance, there's usually overgrowth of these. So, whether that's hydrogen SIBO, where there's an overproduction or an overabundance of these hydrogen producing bugs, things like E. coli or Klebsiella, or we know so many different types of Clostridia and other bugs produce hydrogen gas. And that's usually fine in its place. But when we have too much hydrogen gas and we have too much, especially higher up in the digestive tract in the small intestine, that's going to affect our ability to digest and absorb our nutrients, our factory line, if you will. And that's going to then cause and trigger other symptoms because when we're then feeding these bugs, we're drawing a bunch of water into the intestines or it's highly fermentable. So, hydrogen overgrowth is associated telltale with diarrhea. Also, with gas production, a lot of my patients with hydrogen overgrowth might have excessive flatulence, but I'm actually finding a majority of them have excessive belching and excessive gas production. So usually it's coming up the other side. On the flip side, we then have this methane emo, this methane intestinal methanogenic overgrowth, where there's an overabundance of a certain type of microbe, not a bacteria, but a microbe called archaea. These archaea historically are going to thrive where there is already constipation because then it becomes a vicious cycle. They thrive on stool. They then ferment the stool, make the methane gas, and that slows down your motility, your gut movement, and that causes constipation. It causes bloat. It can cause stuck gas. And usually, you know, if you have that methane overabundance because you can smell the methane. Methane smells like a cow, a petting zoo, an outhouse. So if you say, my gas, my stool is irregular. I don't feel comfortable going to the restroom in public because it has that methane smell. You know there's something more serious going on. If that happens once in a while, you're like, okay, I traveled, I missed a day of bowel movement. It smells. That's normal. If it smells like that all the time and you're very bloated, you're cumulatively distended, because bloat is a sensation, distension is an appearance. If you're very distended, if you're very constipated, if you have a lot of stuck gas, you might have methane overgrowth. So we can assess for that. There are other bugs that can make this sulfury gas. It's called intestinal sulfide overproduction, or ISO. This is characterized by an overproduction of that hydrogen sulfide gas. And these bugs happen to be the same bugs that are responsible for inflammatory bowel disease. So a lot of those with IBD started out with IBS and it continued to progress because these species ran wild and just triggered a cascade of inflammation. So bugs like fusobacteria, desulfovibrio. You also have certain types of E. coli that can make this sulfur gas. Klebsiella can make a little bit of the sulfur gas as well. It first will cause irritation in the inside of the gut, the lumen of the gut. It irritates the nerves, so it can cause urgent stool where it's like, I'm going to poop my pants if I don't go right now. So it's urgent diarrhea. It can cause a lot of visceral hypersensitivity, that nerve hypersensitivity, and the sensation of bloat. They might not always look distended, but they feel very bloated and very sensitive. And then just like methane, there's a telltale smell. This hydrogen sulfide gas smells like rotten eggs. So if your gas, your stool has that rotten egg smell, you might have this ISO, this intestinal sulfide overproduction. And then one of the buddies of these sulfide bugs is actually fungi. Fungi and these sulfur producers, or actually they're not producers, they're reducers. They reduce sulfur, they eat up sulfur to make their hydrogen sulfide gas, but they like to cohabitate with fungi. So sometimes my patients will tell me I had a mold exposure, I became very constipated, had symptoms of candida like oral thrush, vaginal yeast infections, histamine intolerance. Then that turned into this sulfur type as well. And I go back and forth between diarrhea and constipation. But fungi are typically very irritating, very drying. So that is why fungal overgrowth is associated with very dry, flaky scalp. So certain types of dandruff are associated with fungal overgrowth on the scalp because these fungi like places that are moist and warm. So not only is that in your house when you have a water leak, that can be in the body as well. If you have a very sweaty scalp all the time, you wear a helmet for activities or exercise, you might have fungal overgrowth on your scalp. If your care team has said, hey, use ketoconazole shampoo or nizoral shampoo, that's an antifungal. So they're trying to get rid of fungi that has overgrown on your scalp. So there could be an overproduction of yeast or fungi. And again, because they're very drying, they often constipate. So it's very common for those with this overgrowth to be constipated. They're often very bloated. They can experience a lot of belching as well, indigestion. They might have nausea, and they might even see some white specks in their stool. So keep an eye out for these symptoms. And Stacy saying consuming olive leaf helped me with my itchy scalp. And that could be, yes, coming from within. And I always tell my patients if we know you have fungal overgrowth, sometimes when we're treating it, things externally actually get worse. As we're upregulating your detox in your gut, sometimes it shares the load and it says, look, I'm trying to get rid of fungi or yeast in my gut, so let me push them out through my skin and my scalp. And you might initially, when you're incorporating something that helps, have eczema or dermatitis or have a lot of dandruff. Sometimes my patients will start a protocol, an antifungal protocol, and they'll say, I got a vaginal yeast infection. It's coming out. Your body's trying to get rid of it. So that can very much happen. But these are
Mhm.
some common types of dysbiosis, where again, these can then alter your motility on their own and either speed it up too much, slow it down too much, and then ultimately they can affect your gut barrier with the inflammation that they're triggering. So we often get asked, okay, well, what do I do about that? What can I eat, right? Because that feels very controllable. Can you reverse SIBO or any of these types of dysbiosis with diet alone? The answer is sometimes. You heard me mention with methane overgrowth, they need stool in order to survive. So sometimes if you only have methane overgrowth and it's because you're constipated, I saw someone comment earlier, this is timely because I
About
went to my
methane. Yeah.
doctor this week and literally they said that I was full of it. So they were having left-sided pain, which is the end of the colon. That's where stool's going to get stored. He told me I was full of it. Hopefully this will give me some help. So yeah, maybe for that person, when they're constipated, fiber can really help. Diet can be helpful. Hydrating your stools can be very helpful. Eating the right amount of fiber. For females, we know the bare minimum is at least 25 grams. For males, at least 38 grams of fiber per day. So sometimes, yes, adding the right amount and the right type of fiber can help. We have two main types of fiber. You have insoluble fiber that doesn't drink up water, it acts more like a broom. So think of things like kale and celery and apples and even psyllium husks or the gloopy metamucil that your grandmother used to take. That's insoluble fiber. That's going to just kind of try to push things out. So we need some of that. We also need soluble fiber, which acts like a mop. It drinks up water, right? You don't wet a broom, you wet a mop. So you want that soluble fiber that drinks up water, acts like a mop, so it can kind of hydrate things along and also clean up any leftover goo or gunk or spots. So adding fiber can sometimes, yeah, help that stool slide right out, can get rid of methane overgrowth. Sometimes it will not. So sometimes diet alone isn't enough to correct that dysbiosis. So it could be because of something chronic, or it could just be more involved. So again, whether it's a kid, I've had kids who, after visiting water parks, had post-infectious IBS.
I feel your kid.
So James can feel that. Sometimes it's from food poisoning. Sometimes it is from a surgery where their motility slowed down and their mobility slowed down, and that caused some microbial overgrowth. Sometimes it was from taking antibiotics. Sometimes it was from lack of fiber in the diet or any physical restriction if they had an injury or a neurodegenerative disease, anything that affects either the way the muscles or the nerves move can cause some of this. So many different causes for SIBO, but we know there can be lots of different types of management. So this is where, as a dietitian, an integrative dietitian, I can make suggestions to people where we can kind of say, okay, first let's figure out, do you have it? Let's get you tested. What do you have? Which type do you have? And then how much do you have of it? Because that's going to dictate how we're going to correct this. Because sometimes it can be corrected, like I was saying with diet alone. In a couple months, they're feeling great. They've added a couple kiwis and some chia seeds and dragon fruit and enough water. And I've had some people who are like, my
Yeah.
IBS is gone. That was it. That was all I needed. Sometimes we'll go further. We'll add magnesium. We'll add fiber powder. Sometimes we add more things to help upregulate their motility. Sometimes people will take specific antibiotics to target some of those bugs when we know exactly who we're dealing with. I will often recommend herbs, antimicrobial herbs, when we know, okay, we have an overgrowth and we need to manage that. We'll often use things that upregulate motility, whether that's as simple as peppermint and ginger, or maybe that's more involved like 5-HTP that can cause your serotonin production to increase. Sometimes it's surgical management or physical release of restricted tissue. I've had patients who say, yeah, I have scar tissue or adhesions from past C-sections, past abdominal surgeries. And sometimes working on that is really important. So there's so many ways you can go about it. Certain dietary modifications that we'll recommend are, depending on what you have, you want to eat according to the type of dysbiosis you have. So sometimes for hydrogen overgrowth, methane overgrowth, we'll recommend something like a low FODMAP diet where we're decreasing the fermentable carbohydrates one is eating, because maybe if there's less FODMAP in the diet, there's less food source for those methane producers, then there's going to be better motility. This is very temporary. These elimination diets are usually about 4 weeks at a time. So we'll go for a temporary 4-week low FODMAP diet and then start reintroducing group by group. If there's fungal overgrowth or quite a bit of gut barrier damage, sometimes we'll go low histamine, where we're reducing those high histamine foods and trying to break them down, trying to break down the histamines that are coming in even better. If they do have an overabundance of those sulfur reducing bugs, sometimes we'll recommend a temporary low sulfur diet just so we're not feeding them a huge buffet. Or we'll use certain enzymes that break down the sulfur, help them. And then there's low fermentation eating as well. That's kind of a modified low FODMAP. Somebody's saying low FODMAP vegan is difficult. Any tips for that? Somebody's suggesting a couple books, which can be really helpful. Low FODMAP vegan. And those can be really helpful. In our program, we have a SIBO IBS program. We have a completely plant-based 7-week elimination of FODMAPs if somebody needs it for that long. But our program was catered to those who are plant-based, who are finding these different elimination diets difficult. But the goal is never to remain eliminated forever. It is to figure out the root of your SIBO and really find a way to deal with it. Even if that is a mobility and a motility issue, you could get on a prokinetic. Even if it is a chronic long-term disease, there are always things that can help. So that way you're not living with SIBO. Because I've had patients come to me and they're like, well, I don't really want to take antibiotics. I don't want to take herbs. I kind of want to just let it alone. Um, Depending on what type you have and how much you have, again, sometimes it spontaneously resolves based on what you're changing. But if you have 10 times, 20 times the normal amount of gas and you're kind of just, your plan is to just leave it there, that's not always a great plan because, like we started out with, remember they can eat away at your mucosal barrier. So you don't want to just kind of leave them there. You want to figure out what you have, how much you have, what you can do with them as well.
And we always say it's easy to eliminate. Like that's kind of the easy part where it's like, oh yeah, okay, you can maybe look this up and go, okay, I'm gonna go low FODMAP, eliminate FODMAPs. What's difficult is going, okay, well, what's the plan after that? How do
Hmm.
you reintroduce? Well, what is actually going on? Maybe you need what we do in our program, in our practice, is combine some of these because
Hmm.
maybe it's more than one going on at the same time. You are more complex than a general low FODMAP, even vegan low FODMAP, right? So it's more complex than that. So that's where we really get into the weeds of this. And we are one of the only programs that does it 100% plant-based or modified for you, but one of the only programs that does it 100% plant-based because most of what's out there, especially in the integrative and functional space, is saying, "Oh, you have an overgrowth of some kind? Eat more chicken and fish and you're adding a lot of animal products and we're saying eliminate and then really from there it's like well how do I then reintroduce right and so really what we call this and the simple way to explain this is a reverse elimination plan really our goal is to say okay eliminating can be helpful in the right way in the right context but then you need to reverse that elimination in the proper way and come back from it better than you were before. Not many out there can do that, and that's what is very difficult. So if this is speaking to you, scan this or go to marriotthealth.com. We can give you more information. This is where again we've made this from Dahlia's needs, and then we realize, oh, a lot more people need this. So it's
Hmm.
why we have thousands of patients and it's helping thousands of patients. So very cool. But
And, we really do take a customized approach. Whether it is you going through our program, you can still customize it to yourself. There's a lot of interactive quizzes and things that will make suggestions. We test, we really try not to guess. So, even in the program, there is testing that's suggested that you can then get
Mm,
ordered, or you can even order yourself. Addressing non food issues, because again, it's not always the food. Sometimes I have people
just
come
the
to me
food,
and
yeah.
they're like, I've been low FODMAP for 5 years. I'm not better. I'm actually worse because it was not just the food. We need to
Hmm.
address stress. We need to address sleep. We need to address just so many different social emotional factors. Sometimes it's addressing the environment if they're living in an environment that has a
Mold or
biohazard or something that's off in their environment. The goal is always adding more plants eventually, and then
mhm.
long-term root cause healing. And we do. I see we have a question about glyphosate, and we do
Mhm.
address that in the course. Somebody is asking, can you talk about glyphosate, Roundup exposure harming our
It's
gut microbiome,
it's taking all
kills the
my
microbiome in beef?
strength to not talk about I love talking about
Yes, you're
glyphosate,
speaking
but I
Bangladesh
want to
language.
come back for the Q&A at 5:30. I mean, we're gonna keep these questions and because I just want to be mindful
But
of your
that can
time,
be
but
part of root cause healing because we really
yeah.
identified that. So, that can kind of go in with this next question and this next thought process. So, we will touch on it a little
Oh,
bit, but
okay.
you
Let's
must
do it.
cleanse and reset your gut.
Oh,
So, whether
yeah.
we're completely obliterating things, which is kind of what a
Oh,
pesticide does, right? Kind of comes in and completely brings things out. But I have a lot of people who are like, well, I was plant-based, then I was low FODMAP plant-based. That wasn't working for me. So then I started doing water fasting. Then I started doing
yeah.
dry fasting. So they go more and more and more restrictive. I get, I go on parasite cleanses, I have people say. So they're really trying to cleanse and reset their gut over and over and over. And sometimes that helps, I will say. For some people, if you have parasitic overgrowth, a parasite cleanse can help. If you do have, if you do benefit from taking periods of fasting, that can work. There's so much good data for a fasting mimicking diet. So I'm not saying never, but there's more context behind
It's
that.
like
So
a
it's
yes,
really
but.
important to recognize that.
So a lot of what can cleanse, we are all about educating on what cleanses and helps balance on a day-to-day basis, not just like, okay, I'm gonna live my life, let's say 11 months out of the year, and 1 month I'm gonna do this hardcore water fast, juice fast cleanse, or maybe it's more often than that. We're all about saying sleeping is helping you cleanse. Pooping is helping you cleanse, right? Fasting at night, time restricted. So we can get into the weeds of this, but like interval eating, which is like time restricted feeding, which is essentially just saying, hey, at 8 a.m., I start eating, at 8 p.m., I stop eating, right? Where many Americans, especially, but even Europeans and many in first world countries, will eat at all hours or very late
Mhm.
hours of the night. And so, really, your fasting window is very small. Fasting is important. That's
Yeah.
part of the cleanse that you do. So, if you're not fasting every day, you're not cleansing every day.
And maybe your eating window needs to change. Maybe you
Right.
10 to 4 works for you or 10 to 6 works for you. That can
Mhm.
be subjective and in fact and influenced by many different things.
Totally. And so here in the graphic, what you're seeing is a lot of what you're doing every day to help reset and
Mhm.
cleanse and fast is then playing into who's living in your gut with the population, the function of your gut, how well you're going to the bathroom and feeling, and overall the what's being made and the structure, right? Going back to, I know we talked about this very little, but the gut structure, the barrier, the mucosal layer, you've seen that theme all throughout. I was being sarcastic because it's so important. Really, the structure then gives way to the function and the population.
Mhm.
Without the healthy structure, it's like build it and they will come. Build a healthy gut and the microbes will come, right? And then you're going to get hopefully what's on top. Daily bowel movements and healthy
Mhm.
gas production. We're not saying we say farts are friends, but too many, and if it smells like a cow, yeah, it crosses the line a little bit. But no GI symptoms, thriving health. If not, you kind of go below where it's a lot of what we've been talking about with some of these questions, right? The malodorous gas and reflux and diarrhea, you start to lose that. And yes, in context, some cleanses can help, but it's the daily cleanses, so to
Mhm.
speak. It's what you're doing daily to cleanse. Really, your gut microbiome in and of itself is made to help you detox. It helps detox
Their main
hormones
detox organ.
and cholesterol. It helps recycle hormones. It helps recycle nutrients. So it's made in and of itself not only to detox, but to recycle and
Hmm.
be an efficient factory, like we said, right? So yes,
Hmm. And our gut is also self-cleaning. So what a
yes.
lot of people don't realize is not just that time restricted feeding where you're getting that overnight fast, but between meals, you really
Mhm.
should be also getting a fast of 3 to 4 hours because when we are in a fasted state for at least 90 minutes at a time, we have a natural cleaning wave that takes place from the top of our esophagus to the end of our small intestine. And that is called our migrating motor complex. So if you're constantly feasting and you're very seldom fasting, you are not cleaning up some of those bacteria that can cause some of that microbial imbalance and microbial overgrowth. You might be also leaving behind debris and dead cells and just things that shouldn't sit there and fester in your gut. So again, whether it's that overnight minimum 12, but ideally 14, 16-hour fast per day, it's also fasting in between your meals. So taking that 3 to 4 hour break between your meals, not just grazing all throughout the day and eating throughout the day can be so important. That is my one of the first things I'll recommend to my IBS patients. Stop snacking. It is not
Mhm.
amazing for your gut. So try to eat your 3 meals and don't eat in between them. Also, try to optimize how quickly you can digest those 3 meals. So chew your food really well. That is one way. Again, we talked about pre-digesting with the soaking and the cooking and blending and freezing. Yes, pre-digest it because that'll make it easier to digest, but chew your food as well. You would be so surprised. I encourage you all, if this is your one takeaway, the next meal you eat, count how many times you chew every bite. It should be a minimum of 20. 20 to 30 plus chews per bite is optimal. When I recommend that, I have so many people come back to me and say, oh my goodness, I was chewing 5 or 6 times per bite. And that's why I was seeing undigested whole blueberries in my stool and beans, and I was seeing huge pieces of greens. I wasn't chewing them. So my gut can only handle so much before it's like, forget it. Just abort, get out, get rid of this. I can't. This is too much work for me. So again, you can pre-digest. You can also digest properly by practicing that time restricted feeding and practicing that proper chewing. So important. The average healthy person is going to have 8 to 12 mmc, that migrating motor complex sweeps every day. So that's both when you're at night sleeping and between your meals. Studies show some of those gases and those bugs that we had talked about in previous slides can slow it down to the point where people will have 0 or 2 a day. So you want to really help your system, help your body. If it's not the gases doing it, you really don't want to do it on your own. So really, and someone's commenting, oh my gosh, I chew, I swallow. So
Laura's making me LOL over here.
yes. So it's so important to really practice those basic things. Other things that can help with that digestion and that structure and function and population, get good sleep because your circadian rhythm directly affects your gut rhythm, your gut movement. So really try to optimize your sleep as much as possible. Not only does the circadian rhythm itself go right in line with that bowel rhythm, we also know you need serotonin for both things. Serotonin helps you make melatonin, which helps you stay asleep. Serotonin is also one of the highest produced neurotransmitters in your gut that helps with gut movement or gut motility. It also helps you feel chill throughout the day. But if you're not getting enough sleep and you're not allowing that break for serotonin production overnight, it's not going to really help with digestion. So that is so important as well.
I just figured out why I never got gut issues, even though I was a very unhealthy child and
You just have a light
person.
bulb.
I sleep. I can sleep anywhere.
Yes.
So I think sleep protected me. So there you go. I'm a case
That
study.
is true.
So
Absolutely. But it is so important. Sleep and stress reduction. And, we know the two can go hand in hand with some people when they're stressed, they just knock out, they just fall asleep.
that's me.
But I tend to find my patients whose nervous systems react differently, who are maybe very sympathetic, they're very fight or
Mm,
flight. They're not necessarily the freeze or the fawn that can be a little
right.
bit less deleterious, but my patients who are that fight and flight, they often are stressing out their gut, and that's going to attract those
Hmm.
inflammatory opportunists who are like, "Ooh, a fight's breaking out. Let me come and watch, and let me bring my friends as well." So many of these things, these just basic lifestyle habits, are not only helpful for your blood pressure, your blood sugar, they are so helpful for your gut and what I like to call your gut babies, right? We have over 100 trillion microbes and bacteria living in our gut, and they're like your little babies. You really want to make sure, just like with your kids, they're getting to bed on time, they're eating well, they're not feeling really stressed, they're not overwhelmed. So help them out with doing some of these things.
And this is what we want. So these pictures are the same to us, right? We have this beautiful ecosystem, and I tried to make this as fairy
Colorful.
tale and colorful. And to the right, it's the same. It's a fairy tale colorful. Like we have a mix of microbes living together and balancing one another. We call this homeostasis. In the gut, we call this eubiosis. In life, we call it balance.
Mm.
Individually, we call it equilibrium. And they're all meaning the same thing. It is this beautiful balance, and that is really what we want. That is the goal. And also a point here, because the original question was cleanses and detoxes and all of that, is you have to also realize these very extreme and unnecessary, depending on the proper context, cleanses can also starve this healthy eubiosis. It can also starve out healthy microbes that we already have there. And you're going, oh, I'm going to do a water fast. And maybe you don't need to necessarily do the water fast. You are then starving your
Mhm.
ecosystem out as well. So it's understanding that context.
Because a lot of the times, what people don't realize is if you have an overabundance of those opportunists and you're like, I'm in a water fast so I can starve them, you're also starving your cute, cuddly, helpful anti-inflammatory bugs. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Maybe you're coming in with already a deficit of them, and then you keep trying to starve out these other ones and you're giving them all your attention, but it's damaging the healthy ones more and more and
Hmm.
more. So it's so important to really seek out advice if you find that those things are not working. And, I know, especially a few years ago, some of the quote unquote experts or some of the advice that was out there, whether it was on social media or, with certain practitioners, they were recommending a lot of food sensitivity testing. So is this useful? Our answer is straight up no. A lot of
Straight
the
up.
times we try to be very diplomatic and see both sides. Food sensitivity testing, I'm going to straight up give it a no.
We give it a no, guys.
Um,
Sorry.
so with this food sensitivity testing, what people need to realize is you'll get this report back, and it will tell you, based on your IgG immune system, you are so sensitive to these foods. And a lot of the times, the foods that come back high, very high, 9 times out of 10, my clients will bring me these and they're like, that's everything I was eating. Yes,
Hmm.
because this doesn't test what caused your dysbiosis, or it doesn't test what ate through your gut barrier and your mucosal barrier. It's just measuring what foods got into your bloodstream, because your IgG immune system lives in your bloodstream. You have IgA and your mucus inside of your gut. So if you're measuring IgA, that can definitely tell you what you're sensitive or intolerant to. If you're measuring IgE, which also lives in the gut, that's what you're allergic to. IgG has nothing to do with the food that you're eating. It literally will just confirm that you have a leaky gut. So save your money, save your $150 to $200 on these food sensitivity tests, and invest in something that actually works and will actually give you important information.
Which this slide again, this is leaky gut, right? This is leaky gut syndrome, whatever you want to call it, or
Intestinal
intestinal
hyperpermeability.
hyperpermeability. This is leaky gut, right? And we go back, I brought back these two slides that we saw previously because you are degrading that mucosal layer without the plants. You are degrading it with many factors that we talked about, and then with other foods, with the potato chips, with the, other things that we're eating, and we're losing out on nutrients that we could be eating and absorbing, right? Our
Mhm.
factory line is fractured, and we're getting into this state. So again, just had to touch, these are just very common questions we hear. Food sensitivity testing is definitely, it's the last one, but it is probably the last but not
That's a
least.
big fat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
don't do it,
two
guys.
thumbs down.
Um,
But yeah,
Go
with
ahead.
any practitioner you're working with, you really want to ask before they're ordering you all this testing, how will this change your recommendations? Because if they say it's not, That's important for you to know. Or if a practitioner says you have to spend $800, $1,000 on this testing panel before I will work with you, that's a red flag with a practitioner as well. That
Mhm.
means they're treating a paper, they're not treating you. They're not really taking into account what you say. They probably aren't as well versed in the gut as well. And they're like, well, let me just order a stool test and a food sensitivity test. That will tell me exactly what this person needs to do. But if they don't know what to do with the information on some of those tests, they might give you the wrong suggestions. And I've seen that happen a lot with really well-meaning practitioners. So it's really important when your provider wants to order one of these things, ask, what will that do? How's that going to change what you're recommending? How much is this going to cost? And why do I need this? What will happen if I don't get that test? So important for you to ask, especially for gut testing. This is a big industry, and we know this. We have a gut health, huge gut health program in our company. So we get approached by a lot of these gut testing companies. And we will say a lot of them we are not very confident with. A lot of them are like, hey, we're just using AI and that's going to answer everybody's problems. And, it'll just tell people exactly what to eat, exactly what to do. And then they'll show us the reports. And I'm like, that's not based on the microbes that showed up in that sample you showed me. That's not how somebody should be eating. So a lot of these companies are monopolizing and really finding that people with GI issues are desperate. And a lot of times they will spend
Mhm.
a lot of money on testing, a lot of money on intervention. So you really want to ask your provider, why this test? Like, if you're going to suggest a stool test, why did you pick this one? Not
Mhm.
because, like, oh, the rep came to my office and said that this is the best one. Did you do your due diligence and did you study all the gut health tests, all the stool tests that are out there? Why did you pick this breath test? Why are you suggesting that? Why don't you suggest that I start with basic blood work and something like an endoscopy? Really ask your provider what the motivation is. So that's our approach. Again, I don't think I shared this, but my background, I have previously worked and been trained in kind of the traditional Western model. When we did our traditional training, we worked in hospitals, we've worked with gastroenterologists, but also I have that functional medicine training. I have that integrative training. I have worked with naturopaths and functional medicine doctors. So it's really important to be able to take both. And that's what integrative is. You're taking the best parts of both worlds and you're incorporating them together. So that is why we're so passionate about what we do. That is why we share so many free resources, whether that's social media or our weekly Good Gut Live podcast. That is why we go on these summits and we talk about this topic because we are going to continue to see gut issues on the rise. Unfortunately, just like I mentioned, colon cancer is on the rise, IBS is on the rise. We don't want that to be you and your family. We want to help you heal with each meal.
Look at that timing. Thank you all so much. And we'll put here as just a reminder again, if you reach out, you can scan or go to marriedhealth.com. And if you put real truth in the subject, you're entered to win a cool prize. So thank you all so much. This was like great timing, and we're excited to be coming on later
On
for
the
a Q&A
panel,
on the panel.
we'll be back.
Yes. So I want to save my questions for later, but I appreciate all the information. Maybe I can pull one up from the chat right here. Glyphosate, we're definitely waiting for 8:15 because I feel like that's going to be a longer answer
Perfect.
than the time that we have. Um, let's see here. So okay, well, just so you said not the IgG tests. What
Mhm.
what tests would you recommend? Is it easy to test for IgE and IgA?
Yeah, always start there because I mean, those are covered by insurance, but get a blood test or go see an allergist and get the skin prick test. See what you're actually allergic to.
Mhm.
And then IgA testing is also informative as well because that can kind of tell you inside of the gut what are you responding to. But I always say start with IgE testing, and then sometimes we'll start with a simple elimination diet, but IgE testing, I would say, is gold standard, really informative.
Okay, and that'll tell you allergies. So just to be clear, so
Yeah.
IgG is for sensitivities, and what you're saying is that the reason you see sensitivities for the food that you eat is because you have a leaky gut or you have a
Mhm.
intestinal hyperpermeability going on,
Yes. Yeah.
and I had to write that down.
Love
And
it.
it's allowing for all of the food to get into your bloodstream, and it's showing
Mhm.
sensitivity because it shouldn't be there because of the
Yeah,
leaky. There's leaky gut.
absolutely.
Um, so how would somebody, you hear this with gluten-free, and we just have like a minute left, but we hear this with gluten sensitivity, where not everybody is allergic, but they have sensitivities to it. How would they test for that if it's not an allergy?
First and foremost, I would say get just celiac testing. You can get a blood test to see, do you have celiac disease? Do you carry any of the genes that will trigger celiac? But then you can test tissue transglutaminase, IgA, to again see, is your gut itself, the IgA testing will tell you, is your gut itself reacting to the gluten and to some of those gluten proteins? So that will further tell you. If you're not celiac, you could test positive for that non-celiac gluten sensitivity via blood.
All right, great. Well, that concludes our time. I want to thank you very much for all the information that you shared. If we can unmute the audience to share their appreciation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.